Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hi there, and welcome to Berlin. Well, it's now 33 years since the Berlin Wall came down and 34 years since German reunification. So in this video, I'm going to do a sort of Cold War battlefield tour with you. I'm going to take you back in time, 36, 37 years, just before the wall came down, and show you how we got from West Germany to West Berlin using the Berlin Transit Corridor through the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany. So here I am in my Tesla, a car which would have been science fiction in the Cold War of the 1980s, in what was once West Germany, heading now eastwards towards what was once the inner German border. For reference, I'm going to set our adventure in the year 1987. Actually, in that year I was based in British Forces Germany as a 19-year-old army corporal. As you recall from my intro to this video, East and West Germany were divided by the fortified and closed inner German border. The DDR, Deutsche Democratic Republic, or East Germany as we called it, was under Soviet proxy control. Berlin was likewise split into East and West, West being controlled by the Allied powers and East by the Soviets. If you were a Western power, military, if you needed to get to West Berlin, you had three options. You could fly, which is very easy. You could take a special closed military train from West Germany to West Berlin, or you could use the West Berlin Transit Corridor, which we're going to do today. The Soviets allowed the Western military powers the use of one autobahn to get from West Germany to West Berlin through their controlled territory in East Germany. You had one point of entry and one point of exit. These were known by their checkpoint names, Checkpoint Alpha and Checkpoint Bravo. There is a third checkpoint, which I'm sure you've heard of through popular culture, and that was in the centre of Berlin, which transited from West Berlin to East Berlin, and that's called Checkpoint Charlie. Even though it's a staple of many spy films, we rarely use Checkpoint Charlie, as nobody really had much cause to go into East Berlin. So I'm not going to mention it again in this video. Checkpoint Alpha and Checkpoint Bravo are the two we need to remember. Now, you couldn't just grab your car and drive off to West Berlin from West Germany. You needed one of these, an Allied movement order, or in Russian, Putevka. This was your authority to enter Soviet and East German territory. For us Brits, it was a BTD form, and you got one of these through your movement cell. Now, generally, you weren't allowed to travel single crewed, but for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to drive on my own. So I've got my movement order, and I'm now off to the border town of Helmstedt. Today, Helmstedt is a sleepy little Lower Saxony town with a autobahn and a Raststätte nearby. But in 1987, it was a frontier town in the classic sense, a bit like Dodge City, sitting right on the edge of the inner German border. Helmstedt was the gateway to West Berlin and played host to the West German border control station and Allied Checkpoint Alpha. For British travellers, before we could proceed to the checkpoint and the border, we first had to report to this place, the Royal Military Police ACD, Autobahn Control Detachment. If you were in a military vehicle, you were exempt at this stage, but if you were driving your private car, then this part was mandatory. The ACD was a small outpost of 246 Provost Company that covered the Helmstedt to Caesar section of the transit corridor. They comprised of a control room, a duty desk, Autobahn sweep cars, RMP recovery, and a Royal Medical Corps paramedic and ambulance. During the working day, there was a roadhouse here. No, not like that. but it's a good 80s reference, where you could get a coffee and a meal and importantly use the toilet. But the main reason you were here was to get your movement order examined by the RMP, issued your movement pack and watch a couple of mandatory videos.
There now follows a short statement concerning security.
West Berlin is unique. It is the only location where servicemen and UK-based civilians travelling to and from the city by road have direct, face-to-face contact with the Soviet military personnel. It is therefore vital that any attempt to engage you in a conversation or trading for military items be reported to the checkpoint NCO at the end of your journey. Should you be spoken to by a Soviet or East German national in English or in a language you both understand at any time during your journey through East Germany, you must do the following. Remember as much detail about the conversation as you can, as well as the physical description, dress, and rank of the individual. Remain non-committal throughout and do not agree to anything. Do not become overly nervous or aggressive. Once it is realized that you are not responding, you'll be left alone. And remember, you only attract attention to yourself by speaking in Russian to the Soviet checkpoint personnel, so don't do it. If you are approached at all during your journey, you must report the incident to the RMP checkpoint NCO and complete the short proforma provided. Be assured your journey will not be delayed in any way. If you're in doubt, then ask the RMP checkpoint NCO for assistance. Please, help us to help you.
It'd be the 1980s. Generally, if you're a junior rank, the RMP treated you and spoke to you like utter dirt. But eventually you would walk out with a Berlin travel pack, including an A4 laminated Union Jack, which I'll cover the reason for in a bit. You're now ready to hit Checkpoint Alpha. The second mandatory video you had to watch before you left for Alpha gave instruction on how to use the corridor in its entirety. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use it to illustrate parts of our journey and split it down into parts. So let's go.
You will travel along a 103-mile route through East Germany. This is the only road that the Allies may use to travel into West Berlin. At the start and finish of the journey, all Allied travellers are subject to identity check by Soviet soldiers at Soviet checkpoint Alpha and Bravo. Before going to the Soviet checkpoint at one end and after leaving the Soviet checkpoint at the other end, you are required to stop at the appropriate Allied checkpoint, either Allied Alpha or Bravo. You do not need to worry about the trip. If you listen carefully to this brief, it will give you all the details that you require.
From Helmstedt ACD to Checkpoint Alpha was a very short hop, about a kilometre or about 5 minutes drive. This is an aerial view of Checkpoint Alpha Helmstedt. There's a lot going on here, so let me break it down for you. The actual checkpoint building is already labelled. In the foreground is West Germany, and this is the actual border with East Germany. Contrary to popular belief, there was no man's land on the inner German border. The border itself was simply marked with stripy poles. The border defences started some distance back from this border and were all in East Germany. Marked in red now is the death strip. There was also a DDR surveillance tower right on the border in an armoured compound, which we'll cover in some detail in a minute. Unfortunately, covering the border defence in detail will be another video in its entirety, but all you need to know is this. The wall facing West Germany was the final denial barrier. Just east of that was a 50 to 100 metre wide sand strip known as the death strip. And then behind that, a concrete patrol track. And then 1 to 2 kilometres behind that was the hinterland fence. The zone between the two fences was a total exclusion zone to East German citizens. The term the death strip was not ironic. It was a death strip. It was the free fire zone for the DDR Grenztruppen. You could be shot if you were sighted on the death strip. In addition to the risk of being shot from 1960 onwards, the death strip was mined in places with anti-personnel mines. And then from 1971 onwards, the SM-70 fragmentation mine on a tripwire was fitted to the fences. In total, from 1961 to 1989, 916 East Germans were killed trying to cross the border into the west. The last to die was Chris Goffrey, 20 years old, and he was shot dead on the 5th of February 1989, just 9 months before the wall came down. And very sobering that was, and how you felt sorry for the East German people, but your risk of being shot in the east was virtually nil, and your biggest risk was dangerous DDR drivers. Okay, now we're going to refer to our travel pack and video, which will tell us how to cross the border into the DDR. The first thing we're going to do is pull up and park our car in front of Allied Checkpoint Alpha. Here we are in the present day at the site of the original Checkpoint Alpha, and the checkpoint building itself is now a Zollamt, customs office building. Looking over this wall and then down onto the road, you can see what would have been the original East and West German border.
On being cleared by RMP to leave the Allied checkpoint, you travel to the Soviet checkpoint along the following route. As you leave the Allied checkpoint car park, turn right onto the Autobahn. You are advised to set your trip meter to assist you with your navigation. Take care of lorries and cars coming from your left. Move into the left-hand lane, which is clearly marked military.
Clearly visible from the checkpoint and an imposing presence was this DDR surveillance tower. It abutted right onto the border and had full visibility of the whole western side of the border complex. It was resourced 24/7 by DDR Grenztruppen. They had long-range CCTV, acoustic and electronic eavesdropping equipment. So even before you left Checkpoint Alpha, the East Germans had you under observation. The tower is still here today. It now belongs to the German Forestry Service. Now, I did want to climb it for the video, but it has a no trespassing sign in German, and a forestry worker was watching me like a hawk. But from the front edge at the ground level, you can see how close it was to Allied Checkpoint Alpha. For reference, I would now be standing in East Germany.
Stay in this lane, obeying all speed limits and traffic signs. Pass the East German crash barrier, under a sign gantry up to an East German barrier. Stop and wait for the barrier to be raised. Once the barrier is raised, move forward, crossing the Autobahn that comes from your right. Traffic from your right should give way, but take care as this does not always happen. Pass the first Soviet barrier, move into the right-hand lane and halt at the stop sign outside the Soviet checkpoint building before the zebra crossing. The checkpoint should be manned by Soviet soldiers who look like this. If the checkpoint is manned by East German soldiers who look like this, you should either return to the Allied checkpoint or demand to see a Soviet officer. If you are prevented from returning or a Soviet officer does not arrive, you should remain where you are until RMP come to assist you.
And we're underway. On our right now is Checkpoint Alpha as we pass it, and we're entering East Germany. Right now you can see the mark on the road. The next thing you'll see in slow time is the DDR surveillance tower on your right. And coming up on your left is the next landmark, which is a DDR National Monument. This would have signified welcome to the DDR. 2 columns of concrete and a roundel with a hammer and sickle in the centre. Obviously the roundel's now been removed on reunification. Then it's a quick 3-minute drive up to the Marienborn Soviet and DDR border complex, also known as the Death Star. To clarify, in 1987 you would not have been able to drive on like those trucks are. You would have had to have pulled in here. The rest of the Autobahn would have been blocked. We nicknamed it the Death Star with good reason. The DDR and Soviet border station at Marienborn was the largest in the Eastern Bloc. Now today half of it has been flattened and turned into a modern truck stop and service station, but half of it has been left as it was during the Cold War as a memorial to the division of Germany. As a plug now, in a sister video to this one, I cover the Marienborn Museum and other checkpoints in a lot more detail I can do in this video. Link in the top right hand corner, check it out if you're interested. It could take a West German civilian traveller with a transit visa to West Berlin 6 to 8 hours to clear Marienborn. Thankfully, we Allied travellers, because we didn't recognise the authority of the DDR, went straight to the Soviet checkpoint and missed out all the pain of the Death Star. And this is where you stop your car and you report it to. The tower is actually the master control tower of the Marienborn complex run by the DDR Grenztruppen. The Soviet control checkpoint is now demolished and all that's left is foundations, which I'm stood on now.
The person you have nominated takes the travel and identity documents. Do not take any other documents or your travel pack with you. Approach the Soviet sentry, who will be standing close to the small hut on the left of the road. He will salute you. You must, irrespective of your sex, status, or form of dress, return his salute. Hand your travel and identity documents to him. He will check your documents and, once satisfied as to their accuracy, will return them to you and indicate that you should take them to the checkpoint office. On entering the building, you will see on the right-hand side, about waist high, a document tray similar to those in banks, only the glass has been painted over. Place your travel and identity documents in the tray. They will be taken by a Soviet officer or soldier for checking. When the Soviets have finished this check, the documents will be returned to the tray. Take them and check that all ID cards and passports have been returned and that passports have not been stamped. If they have, return to the Allied checkpoint. Also check that the travel document has been stamped by the Soviet official. Return to the Soviet sentry and hand the travel and identity documents to him. He will check the Soviet stamp and return all documents to you and indicate that you may continue your journey. He will again salute you. Return his salute and return to your car and proceed. As you move forward, the sentry will give his final salute, which must be returned. As you approach the barrier, it will rise. Cross the junction. Beware of traffic from your right. Observing all speed limit and road signs, continue to the end of the checkpoint area, where you will see this sign. You are now on the open Autobahn. Note, the maximum permissible speed for a car on the East German Autobahn is 100 kilometers per hour, and heavy goods vehicles or cars with caravan or trailer is 80 kilometers per hour. Do not exceed these speed limits, or any other lower speed limit you encounter. Obey all road signs. We acknowledge East German traffic regulations, although only accept Soviet authority. En route, you will pass numerous laybys, such as the one you can now see. You may stop at any of these to stretch your legs or rest. But if there are any East German police, or Soviet or East German soldiers in the lay-by, or any enter it whilst you're there, you must move out. You will pass 4 Raststätten during your journey, such as the one shown here. You must not stop at or use any of these Raststätten. There are certain things you should know about corridor travel. Do not take your travel pack into the Soviet checkpoint building. Only those persons listed on your BTD, freight document, or attached nominal roll may travel in your vehicle. Photography is forbidden between Allied checkpoints. Keep cameras, binoculars, etc. out of sight. If you are in difficulties, an RMP patrol will commence searching for you after 5 hours. Breakdowns. A tow may be accepted from other Allied travellers. If you choose not to accept a tow or cannot get one, follow this procedure. Turn to Part 5 of your travel pack. Take out and complete the breakdown card as fully as possible. Make sure the travel pack number is entered on the card. Stop a West German or Allied traveller. You can use the Union Jack at 5C to make yourself obvious. Give them the breakdown card. Wait for recovery. Do not move, even if you repair the fault. Ensure you place out a warning triangle. If you are involved in a road traffic accident, do the following. Minor accidents. Exchange particulars, make a quick sketch plan, and proceed. For major accidents, carry out the breakdown procedure. Do not make any statements to the East German police. Do not allow injured Allied persons to be removed by Soviet or GDR ambulance unless absolutely necessary. If necessary, request the presence of a Soviet officer using the incident card. RMP NCOs will come to your assistance. In cases of other incidents during your journey, and if you are stopped by GDR officials for any reason, do not pay fines or tolls. Do not allow them to search your vehicle or person. Do not admit liability for any offence. Request the presence of a Soviet officer. If not allowed to proceed, stop an Allied traveller and send a message to the nearest checkpoint. In military vehicles, show no identity documents. In BFG vehicles, display your BTD at the window. If a Soviet officer arrives, you may show him your BTD, freight documents, and identity documents. You may pay a fine, but have the receipt signed or countersigned by him. If in doubt, wait for the RMP patrol to find you.
It's easy to forget now in 30 years, but back then, East Germany and the USSR were totalitarian, oppressive regimes where state surveillance was absolute. By using the corridor, as a Westerner, you were under surveillance from start to absolute finish. A common misconception from the Cold War was that your biggest threat in the East was from the Soviet KGB. That couldn't be further from the truth. Certainly as a corridor traveller, the KGB would have considered it beneath them to get involved in anything you did. No, that was left to the bottom feeders of the Staatssicherheitsdienst, SSD, or more commonly known as the Stasi. Now, obviously these guys are actors, but they get the look down to a T. Bad haircuts, porn-style tashes, beige 1970s clothing. But unless you did something absolutely stupid, it's very unlikely you'd have any contact with the Stasi. You'd have to get a camera out or pick up an East German hitchhiker for them to pull you over. These actors, I don't know what film it's from, but it's quite accurate. This is what we would have called a Stasi goon car. A goon car would have been a Lada, either 2 up with 2 Stasi operatives or 4 Stasi, all staring intently at you. Obviously, because they're a covert asset, well, they weren't very covert, but because you didn't see them all the time, it's easy to forget how prolific the Stasi were on the corridor. So this is a map taken from the Stasi Museum in present-day Germany, and it has all the patrol sectors for the Stasi from Checkpoint Alpha to Magdeburg, not even halfway to Berlin. As you can see, there's some 40 call signs. Now, not all of them would be deployed at any one time, but that's about 30 goon cars on the road at any one given time on the corridor. Like I said, the Stasi generally wouldn't mess with you. If they wanted you stopping, they would get the VoPo to do it. The DDR Volkspolizei, otherwise known as VoPo, were the state police and state enforcers. They were, to a man, bullies and thugs. They were also often corrupt. Their most common trick was to pull a Western traveller over, accuse them of speeding, and demand a cash on the spot fine. Because the West didn't recognise East Germany as a legitimate state, Allied travellers did not recognise the authority of the VoPo. If pulled over, we were to lock our doors and put this sign in your side window demanding the presence of a Soviet officer. If you encountered problems with the VoPo, usually they wouldn't use force on you. They would simply box you in and await the arrival of a Soviet officer. Close to Magdeburg, you would probably get a captain or a major with an English interpreter come out from the garrison in one of these UAZ trucks. Nearer to checkpoint Alpha and Bravo, you would probably get a border specialist officer who spoke some, but not much, English. Because of World War II, generally the Soviets disliked the East German people, but they absolutely detested the VoPo. So usually, unless you'd done something egregiously bad, the Soviet officer would take your side and allow you to carry on your way. Although they had absolutely no powers in East Germany, the RMP had sweep cars that would patrol the Autobahn. If you went missing for more than 5 hours, they would come and search for you. If you got yourself into trouble, they might be summoned by the Soviet authorities to come and deal with you. Quite often that would involve a Mexican standoff between the VoPo, the Soviets and the RMPs, and a massive diplomatic incident being sorted out at Army headquarters level. You could be there several hours before you were released back to checkpoint Alpha and Bravo, upon which the RMP would give you hell and you'd end up charged with a disciplinary offence. One of the easiest ways to get into trouble in the corridor was to get lost.
At kilometre stone 81, you will cross the Elbe River. The next focal point is Ziesar at kilometre stone 43, the halfway point between Helmstedt and Berlin.
So a word of navigation. It is a big thing. It's detailed in both the video and in your BTD pack. The reason for that is the Allies had authority to use one route and one route alone. If you made a navigation error, you were off route. Now, if you made a mistake and backtracked and got back onto route straight away, chances are you'd be left alone. But if you got horribly lost and compounded the error, then ended up on side roads or in an East German town or village, you were going to get boxed in. The Soviets were going to get involved and a diplomatic incident would kick off.
At kilometre stone 0.5, you will come to the first of 3 intersections you must negotiate. This is 79.5 miles from Helmstedt. Follow the signs, black on yellow, Transit West Berlin. At kilometre stone 99, you will come to the second intersection, again following the black on yellow sign, Transit West Berlin. At this intersection, go straight on. Beware of traffic from your left as you join the next Autobahn. At kilometre stone 88, you come to the third and final intersection. Follow black on yellow sign Transit West Berlin.
Your third turn is very close to the end of your journey, so it's time for your co-driver to get your BTD travel back out and start revising the process for going through the Soviet checkpoint at Bravo.
You have now negotiated all 3 intersections. From here, it is a straight run to the checkpoint area. The approach is well signed. Move into the military lane as soon as possible. you will come to a short barrier. When this is fully raised, move forward to the Soviet checkpoint barrier. Stop and wait for it to be raised. Don't be alarmed if this takes several minutes. Once the barrier has been raised, move forward to the position indicated by the Soviet sentry before the zebra crossing. The nominated person only gets out of the car with travel and ID documents only. Carry out the same procedure as at the first Soviet checkpoint. The checkpoint office is on the left-hand side of the road. As you pass the final Soviet barrier, take great care to watch for traffic from the left. Keep in the military lane, passing the East German pressure barrier to Allied checkpoint Bravo.
This is the modern day Autobahn approach route to checkpoint Bravo. Unfortunately, there's roadworks going on, which doesn't make for a really realistic video. Unfortunately, the Soviet and DDR border control station at Drevets has been completely and utterly demolished and flattened. It's now a retail stroke business park known as Europark. Pay attention to the white arrow because that indicates the station control tower, which still survives as a small museum. And this is it today. The DDR Soviet Station Control Tower is a small museum. Unfortunately, it was closed on the day I visited and the weather wasn't particularly brilliant. There is a panorama vista board which shows you what the border area would have looked like back in the Cold War. This is a modern view looking from the Soviet DDR side back towards Allied checkpoint Bravo. And this is the same view, taken in 1987 but from the air. The death strip is the same layout as you found at Marienborn at checkpoint Alpha, but this time you have a fully enclosed modern watchtower looking towards the border. Another point of interest is the Panzerdenkmal, the Panzer Memorial on the right. I'll cover in a second. And finally, in the top centre of the photograph, you can see Allied checkpoint Bravo. Sadly now concealed by trees in the modern day. But on the right hand side you would now be passing what's familiar to anyone who used the corridor in the 1980s, the Panzerdenkmal, or the Tank Memorial. This was a Soviet war memorial constructed in 1968 and decked with a World War II era T-34 tank. When the war came down in 1989 it became very unpopular and was regularly vandalised. So in 1991 when the Soviet army, now defunct, withdrew back to the newly created Russian Federation, they took the memorial with them. In 1993, with the Soviet tank gone and the concrete plinth now redundant and abandoned and forgotten about, an enterprising German artist decided to paint a snow loader pink and get it craned onto the top of the plinth. Principally as a joke and a work of art, but it has remained ever since and is now quite famous. From the Panzer Memorial you're now crossing the original death strip and then it's a straight run into checkpoint Bravo. A quick reminder from the 1987 air photograph about what the death strip looks like before you hit Bravo, because we're now going to go on foot into the area of the former death strip. After German reunification in 1990, much of the original Cold War death strip remained in government hands. Certainly in Berlin, this real estate has been rewilded and has been turned into a public footpath, public right-of-way, known as the Berliner Mauerweg, or Berlin Wall Footpath. This is where the death strip closest to checkpoint Bravo and the border was sited, and is also the site, as I blend in now, of the closest control tower towards the border. The border between the DDR and West Berlin is the footbridge we're about to go under now.
Now your destination is on the left.
Okay, and this is how the former Allied checkpoint Bravo looks today. Let's go back in time to 1987 and see what we've got to do here.
Park in the Allied car park 30 metres short of the checkpoint. If this car park is full, you may park against the curb, but make sure you do not obstruct the Allied lane. Take your BTD, travel pack and speedometer reading to the RMP NCO at Allied Checkpoint Bravo. That is through the door marked Allied Checkpoint Bravo and up the stairs. Report any occurrences or incidents to the RMP NCO.
And I think we'll trace that famous journey now in the present day. I thought this site was redundant. Actually it's not. It's a working construction company office, and I was getting filthy looks from the people in the office as I was filming. So sorry about this. I made one quick run in and then ran away. From Checkpoint Bravo, looking across the Autobahn to the opposite carriageway and service area, is the famous Dreilinden Raststätte. This was a building built in 1968 and was quite iconic in Berlin at the time. Unfortunately now it's long past its sell-by date. It is redundant, derelict and boarded up, but it's a good piece of architecture to go and review. One quick last look at Allied Checkpoint Bravo and then back in the car on the Autobahn and into West Berlin. We're now home, safe and dry. And the final indicator of this was the statue of the Berlin Bear, placed in 1953 on the Autobahn, that told you were in West Berlin. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please click like, it really does help me out. And if you enjoy Cold War content, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you, bye.